Hi, my name's Taylor Toby. I'm an OpenSciEd teacher and facilitator, and I'm here to discuss with you Lesson 17 from the 8.4 unit Earth and Space. This is a really important lesson. It is the end of the entire unit, and students get to put all the pieces together that they've been working on. And this transfer task or this assessment task is a really great way to see visually all of their thinking come together. So, how did we get here? Students just figured out about the systems, the solar system, and how you can scale down to subsystems and scale up to galaxies, and that it appears gravity is playing a role in that organization. So let's take a look at this final lesson. It is a putting the pieces together lesson. It is 2 days in length, about 20 minutes of prep time. It is not a hands-on investigation, but students will need access to devices to get videos and images. So at the end of the first day, students complete and revise a small group model, and they begin to explain the patterns in the motion and organization of the objects in the universe, and that is due to gravity. On the second day, students determined that gravitational forces are what's causing the motions and organization of the universe at multiple scales. And we go back to our driving question board and realize we have answered so many questions. Specifically, what we will figure out is that there's a similar pattern in the motion, structure, and the organization of the largest scale objects and systems in the known universe due to gravitational forces acting on those objects. Students won't go beyond this large scale structure of the universe. We won't be looking into the Big Bang or any like background microwave radiation or anything like that. Some key moments in Lesson 17. In part 2, students are developing a small group model of the universe. If you find that there are groups that are getting stuck, I like to use some guiding questions to help them think about specific parts of their model. So, for instance, you can say, hey, you have these different objects at different scales, but are the interactions between the objects the same or are they different? And if that's too vague, you can even say specifically, oh, hey, here you drew the moon and the earth moving a certain way. And then in your next scale up, you have the earth moving around the sun. Are there any interactions happening the same in both of those scales, or are those interactions different? Something else you can do is say that you noticed, hey, you have all these parts that you've drawn in the solar system, but they're not crashing into each other as they move through space. Like, why is that? What's happening to keep everybody in their own path? And you're going to get students to start thinking about when we learned about gravity and they figured out about what affects orbits. So the gravity, the force of gravity between the two objects and the speed those objects are moving. If you have groups that are ready for an extension opportunity, then there is an article about black holes that's linked in the teacher's guide that you can have students look at and work on, or you can assign it for home learning. In part 6, students are evaluating the driving question board. You can use the handout that's provided where you type in the questions that your students generated, or you can use the annotation guide from this sheet and then have your students directly annotate onto an image of the driving question board. If you want students to dig deeper, something I really like to do is have a student pick a question that we've answered, any question from the driving question board, develop an answer to that question, and then cite which lessons are sources of evidence. Some material management tips and tricks. So for poster management, we will be going back to the patterns and phenomena in the sky poster, as well as objects that interact through gravity, which we developed in the last lesson. I also recommend having access to all of those consensus models that you have built over this unit. It just helps jog students' memories for how to draw those interactions and those different systems at different scales. During this lesson, you'll be creating the poster for the consensus model for the universe. Thank you so much for joining me in lesson 17. I hope your students feel a really great sense of accomplishment as they get to this final lesson in the unit, and you look back on that driving question board and reflect on how much you have learned during this unit.